Paul certainly did. His struggles here in Philippi turned into great suffering. When Paul said in Philippians 1:3, I give thanks to my God for every remembrance of you, he remembered his suffering in this place. Look again at Acts 16:23 and 24. After they had severely flogged him, they threw them in jail, ordering the jailer to guard them carefully. Receiving such an order, he put them into the inner prison and secured their feet in stocks, in shackles. He not only got stripped naked and beaten in front of the town, but then he gets thrown in jail and has his feet put in the stocks. I bet he remembered that night. Don't you? I guarantee you he remembered it because a miracle happens on this night. Miracle I had the privilege of writing of in Signs and Wonders on page 83. But before the miracle ever arrived, you know what we see in the life of Paul and Silas? We find deep joy. Deep joy. Before the miracle ever comes, look at what it says in verse 25. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. Church, can I tell you something? You got to have some deep, deep, deep joy to be singing hymns at midnight in prison for doing nothing but healing a girl from the demon that had invaded her body. You got to have some deep joy. Even in the midst of his suffering, he's able to remember all that God has already brought him through. And so it's midnight and they're just singing hymns to the Lord. That's why I tell you, it's hard to forget anything when you take the time to remember everything. I don't want to forget how God moves. I don't want to forget the way that God has already rescued me. I don't want to forget all the stuff that God has already done to sustain me. I don't want to forget all the suffering I've already gone through beneath the waves and how His grace was sufficient for me there. I don't want to forget that because in the middle of my next suffering, I need it so I can be singing hymns at midnight. That's why I want to remember everything. My point is this: maybe instead of trying to forget about your suffering, you should be trying to remember all the suffering you've already been through and the way that God has already rescued you from. After all, we know what Paul wrote in Romans 8:28 is true, don't we? He says, we know that all things work together for the good of those who love God, who are called according to His purpose. It's hard to forget anything when you take time to remember everything. We need to remember the source, we need to remember the success, we need to remember our struggles, and we need to remember our suffering.